I think we are. I think we're probably good to start. Welcome to our panel event today, our virtual panel event, and it's all about empowering teams within legal. We are recording this session, so I think the record has already been pressed and it will be made available afterwards. For those people that don't know me, I am Esther McMorris. I am Chief Executive and founder of 9 Feet Tall. 9 Feet Tall is a consultancy that does a lot of work within the legal sector, and we help legal firms, such as our lovely panelists who we have here today. We help them deliver complex change, and that is change in technology, processes, but also in people. And really that people element is something that we're going to talk about today. And we see a very common theme that comes through from clients that we work with around empowering teams and I guess the employer value proposition and what that looks like. So I'm joined by a fabulous panel. We said earlier it's an all-lady lineup, so what's not to like about that? So before we start, if we could do a quick round the table and introduce ourselves. So Helen, as you are in the bright orange background, if you want to start just to introduce yourself, and then we'll come on to some of the questions.
I felt like a bit of spring colour, Esther. I'm not going to lie. It's a little bit dreary here at the moment. So I'm Helen Hodgkinson. I am the Chief People and Places Officer at TLT.
Perfect. Izabel, did you want to go next?
Hi, yes, thank you, Esther. Izabel Grindal. I'm Head of HR Governance and Change at DLA Piper.
Perfect. Emma?
Thanks, Esther, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Emma Dowden. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Burges Salmon.
And Tiggy, last but not least.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Tiggy Atkinson. I'm a partner at 9 Feet Tall, and I head up our legal sector team.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you for everyone who's joining us as well today. If you have got any questions as we go through, we've got some questions already from the survey that was sent out beforehand. But if you've got questions as we go through, just please pop them in the chat and we can put them to the panel as well. So I think, as I said, we're going to talk today about the power of people and the importance of people within legal. And we've seen that, I guess, the Great Resignation. We've seen a huge amount of churn within, and that's not just the legal sector, in all sectors, where it's been really tricky for firms to attract, but also to retain talents. And I guess the traditional way, which was a benefits package and a good salary, is no longer enough. And there's really other things that employers and people are now looking for, such as purpose, such as values, such as culture. And today I'm really excited to talk to these ladies today to find out actually what are the things that we can do to really help attract and retain talent. Because ultimately some of those other factors are going to determine which firm people are going to work with and how long they're actually going to stay there as well. So if we can start, maybe Helen, if I can start off with you, and we've got TLT's clearly Law Firm of the Year for 2021, so I thought I'll get that in for you as well. But within that, I guess, what have you done in terms of the piece around purpose, and have you done additional work or further work to really help define the purpose at TLT?
Thank you, Esther, and thank you for mentioning it. We are super proud of it. I know that awards aren't everything, but actually, you know, there is something about a public statement that kind of confirms you're doing some of the right things. And so, yeah, we haven't got long to go on it, so we probably will continue to mention it until such time as it's handed to the next law firm. However, that piece absolutely, we believe, is the outcome of all that we are doing. And our aim is to be, and everybody, I suspect, is in the same place, is about being a high-performing professional services business. And kind of that's where our purpose begins. So we have spent some time post-pandemic period, and I'll talk a little bit about why that was important to us, looking at what we believe that we stand for. And that's what purpose is all about. And, you know, we knew it was all about being client-centered, of course, because without clients, we don't have a business. We knew it was about being progressive, and that's all about doing the right things in the right ways. We knew it was about being future ready. The world of work has changed. It's changed for our clients. We know technology has a massive impact on that. And we knew it was also about being outstanding, and that was about being outstanding for our people as well as for our clients. And that was really important to us to define that. You know, it won't have escaped many of yours notice that actually, in essence, we're looking at clients, we're looking at people, we're looking at profits as well, and we shouldn't be concerned about that. Without profits, you don't operate as a business. But what you hope is, by looking at the right things in the right way, then those profits come. And the piece about doing it in the right way is incredibly important to us. So it's not about just what we do, but it's about how we do it. But Izabel, I know you're going to come on to values later, even though I was terribly excited to want to talk about them, but we'll hang on for a minute for that bit. And how do we come about this? So we spent a lot of time talking and listening to our clients. We absolutely had a really good look at the market. We absolutely spoke to our people and began to think about how we could reflect all of those views, opinions, quantitative, qualitative, we all know, into our purpose. And timing was really important to us. And actually, post-pandemic was super important to us. And that's because we learned so much about ourselves during that period, stuff that was already available to us, but the nature of how we worked, how we operated together, what we learned about each other, what we learned about what was important to us, it was really important for us to bottle that, hold on to it, and use it as part of the contribution to our purpose.
Perfect, thank you. And I guess maybe if I'll flip on to Emma as well, because I know kind of you picked up on kind of some of the client listening and looking at externally. Is there anything, Emma, that you've done around kind of purpose within Burges Salmon? Oh, you're on mute. And we're still briefly on mute. That's okay. I'll move on to Tiggy. I'll come back to Emma in a second. Tiggy, we talked about purpose, and Helen's kind of
I think Emma's good.
Oh, Emma's good. Go on, Emma. Sorry.
Sorry, I wasn't allowed to unmute myself, it said, so I had to wait for the system to unmute me. So I'm now obviously cleared. So apologies, Esther. What was your question?
Oh, we're just around on purpose. So I guess Helen defined or explained around purpose and looking as well as internally, also looking at clients. And I know within Burges Salmon you do quite a lot around client listening as well. I just wondered if you've done anything specific in the space of kind of defining purpose and looking at purpose to really understand what clients are feeling.
Absolutely, and I echo Helen's comments. It has to be client-led. That informs the organisational culture. And I know we're coming on to values, but actually we looked at our purpose and our values to make sure that they resonated with our people. So they have to be relevant to clients and client-led, but they also have to be authentic to our people, and they have to resonate. And for us, it was really important to make sure that all of our people could talk about who we are and our culture and what we do. So we started with defining our purpose and then our values, which cascades from that, so to roll that out internally. And that's something we've done very recently, post-pandemic, very much echoing what Helen was just describing.
Yeah, and Helen, how did you go about rolling out the purpose? Because I guess there's one thing is defining it and identifying what it is, and then there's a second point around, I guess, Emma, as you're saying, is how do you kind of get your teams to really understand it and buy into it?
Absolutely, and that's ongoing. In part, that was through doing some internal listening sessions. So our managing partner and our people team led those with representatives across the firm so that people were engaged at the outset of the process. Then it's talking to clients and pulling together the sort of internal views with the client perspective. And from that, then going back to people to say, we listened to you, this is what we heard, this is what we believe is our unique proposition, this is our organisational purpose. And then, as you say, Esther, really important that you do the comms cascade back. So that's a mixture of briefings, that's a mixture of workshop sessions, that's cascading right through the organisation so that partners, our heads of our business professional teams are engaged and understand that and can talk to their teams about it, so that anyone in the organisation can talk to a client, new talent, or any external contacts about who we are. And that bit's really important. I think that's ongoing. It's not a one-off exercise. I think you have to keep revisiting it, making sure it's fresh, and probably overdoing the comms more than you think you need to would be my advice on that.
Yeah, good. And I think that's a really important point, is that ongoing communication. Helen, did you find the same at TLT as well, to roll that out? And also, secondly, is have you seen an impact on retention as a result of that, or are you picking the, you know, are you seeing any benefits that you have done as a result directly linked to retention?
So I think there's a couple of bits. If you get it right, so actually your purpose reflects your business and is what your clients are expecting. And there's some challenge in that, because you want some stretch, because we also want to grow at the same time. But actually a lot of your work is done because people are already feeling that which you've already created, and that matters. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Emma's absolutely right. It is a consistent communication exercise through all channels. That's both up and down. And up has become incredibly important post-pandemic because we've levelled. Every single business is level because we've all had a little view and realised that we're all human beings and we're all the same. And so, you know, there's a lot of things that this post-pandemic working has offered us. So does it have an effect on retention? Of course it does, but not on its own. You know, get it wrong and actually, absolutely, people will want to choose to work in other businesses. But we all know, and we're living it, and particularly in the legal sector, I believe at the minute, you know, retaining people is a complex set of dynamics. And purpose has to be core to it, cannot be missing. But also, you know, it's got to be complemented with all the other factors that you've talked about before. And actually, as we know, with line managers who can live, walk and breathe the business. And that's really tricky, you know, because all the other things that we are experiencing now as part of the world of work, so are those line managers. So the job on them at the minute to be holding on to talent it's great, you know, and it's huge. But to begin with purpose really matters.
Yeah, and maybe that segues quite nicely, Tiggy, into that beginning with purpose. And I know at 9 Feet Tall we work with many law firms who are all looking at identifying or defining their purpose and defining their value proposition to their employers. Where do you start? And have you got any advice on how to begin that journey and to get it right, Tiggy?
I think so. Some of the things have already come out. So you want to be listening really carefully to what your clients are telling you that they see, feel, expect of you as a business. But absolutely, it's also about understanding what your teams are feeling and why they want to work for you and what is going to encourage them to stay and to continue to build their career with you, rather than walking across the road, or actually not even walking across the road anymore, working for someone who's based in a completely different geography. So asking those questions actually and wanting to hear the answers, no matter if they're, you know, they make your eyes water somewhat, is really important. And one of the things about starting with purpose is you've got to prepare your team who are going to do some work on this to be able to hear the stuff that comes back, because sometimes it's not all wonderful things. You know, you get told what you're not doing right, and the bits of purpose that people don't agree with, and the profit question which Helen raised, sometimes that causes big debate about, should we be doing this type of work? Is it moral to do some of the work that we've been asked to do? So I think you need to hear that really carefully. And then I think one of the other things is, once you've started to engage, it's keeping the communication, the engagement. I think engagement is very important. So not just one way cascade, but two way. But also then, once you are starting to get to a purpose, it's then making sure that the loop back goes to teams, because it's all very well having an organisational purpose, but you need to understand how your team and you contribute to delivering that purpose. So I think it's making sure that you circle back round again to say, I can not only talk about working for my law firm and where they're trying to get to, but also what's my contribution and what's my team's contribution to us being able to deliver that. That's the kind of golden thread, which I think is really important to help teams to work through once you've set your overall purpose. So just a couple of things.
Yeah, perfect. And I think that's a recurring theme, is that continued communication, so it never quite finishes. If we pick up on values, and maybe Izabel, you can expand on that. How do you feel, and if we're looking at DLA Piper, how have you engaged your teams in discussions around values? And again, it sits in not just defining it, but also how do you get people to really believe in it and really stand behind it?
Well, we were quite lucky in that we refreshed our values in 2017. So that gave us a great opportunity to revisit them, but also engage the whole firm in that. So we did that with a series of workshops that were run in the same way across all of our jurisdictions and in all of our offices, where we shared a draft form of the values, which had already been discussed and debated and tweaked by the kind of top 100 managers in the firm. And everyone got an opportunity to comment on them. But more importantly, we also allowed people to help us define the behaviours that were associated with them and give us examples of, you know, good and bad behaviours that would manifest themselves with these values. So everybody did get engaged, but I suppose, as everyone knows, you know, as you said, defining it is the easy bit. Then really embedding them is the difficult piece. And here we held nominations for values champions. So every office nominated some values champions who were then given tools, assistance, some budget to kind of hold values events and do values activities that were locally relevant. In recognition, you know, we've got 90 offices in over 40 countries. So there is just one, you know, one thing doesn't work in every office. So but that was really important, you know, to actually have local activities to embed the values.
Yeah. Did you find there was a lot of variance between the different offices, and was it tricky to get, I guess, buy-in across kind of 90 different locations?
It was difficult to define, you know, 4 words, you know, 4 values that meant the same to everybody. So there was quite a lot of debate. You know, we are a law firm, so there was, you know, the usual kind of going round and round, you know, over, you know, 1 or 2 very simple words. But once we got there, no, I think everybody was able to operate within that framework. They had the freedom to express it in a different way and to embed it in a slightly different way.
Yeah. Helen, have you found the same at TLT as well? If there was any particular challenges that you've seen around kind of values and getting that across?
I think for me, one of the most interesting but also challenging parts of any values proposition is an individual, your employee, every person has already got their own value set before they even connect with you as a business. And so they've got their own values, they've got their own beliefs, and they're really important to them. So ignore those at your peril. And hopefully what you're doing, also by being really expressive about those that are important to you as a business, is finding those that are of similar like, similar mind, and can really flourish where you're at. That is a challenge. There is no doubt about it, because then all of a sudden what you've got is an incredibly crowded agenda. Whose value is the most valued and the most important? They all are. But, you know, actually, I've worked with a number of businesses, and the reasons I've worked there is because at that point in time, they meant something to me. And actually, they encouraged me, to express myself, to be the individual that I want to be, and that authenticity. And actually, when you find that moment, both as an individual, but also as a business with your employees, then you're in a great spot. Yeah. So, you know, but of course it presents its challenge, because actually trying to find that and continuing to find it and helping people have their voice is constant.
Yeah. And I think, as you were saying, Izabel, I think taking it down to that next level of not just the values, but also the behaviours, and that is something that could really help resonate with people as well. Emma, we hear lots of things around the say-do gap. Can you explain what that means and what that means kind of within Burges Salmon?
Absolutely, and I think Helen just started to touch on this, because I think the values have to resonate with action and behaviours. So, for example, we as a board make all of our decisions through the lens of what are our values, what's our culture, and through that lens, what is the right business decision to make. Now, it doesn't mean everyone will like every decision, but our view is if you start off from that premise and you're authentic to the values, then it helps embed them within the organisation. And I think we want our people to live and breathe our values. They need to see them in action. So I think it's really important that people call out behaviours that aren't aligned to the values. If that happens, you have to deal with it, because if not, you erode the the importance of the value set. And I think it is that classic phrase of walking the talk. So ESG is a really good example to use here. All firms have set various net zero and other really important ESG targets. Rest assured, the talent within all of our firms will call out anything that they see that's contradictory to those. So you can't have a policy and then find you've got disposable cups in your restaurant or something, or anything, however you might feel it's a sort of minutiae or whatever it may be. It's really incredibly important. So I think that holistic walking the talk, making sure that once you've got your values set and you set the things that are really important to you and your culture, that the policies are aligned with it, the behaviours, the action and the decisions you make across your business. Because I think if you do that, you will get that connected individuals to the organisation, will then see that authenticity shine through, and people will want to promote those values as well. So for me, the sort of say-do is fundamental in terms of evidencing to everyone how important they are to an organisation, that they are an imperative and have to be followed in that way. Because I say, I think if you don't do that, it's at your peril.
Yeah, and I guess when you're in a firm and you're working, that's perhaps easier to do because you can demonstrate good leadership and you can celebrate successes. How would you put the lens on that for attracting the right people? So how can you I guess show that you are really truly value centered and you've got these values that you embrace? How does that help attract new people in as well?
And I think you're absolutely right. And actually, I think, and I'll come back to ESG because I think that's really important to a number of people. So we'll get asked by people when they're looking to join us, what is your position on this? What are you doing? It goes to the point that Tiggy made earlier, and this is a really tricky area for law firms, but who do you act for? Are your clients holding to the values of your ESG proposition? And I think our people do want to know what do you stand for? What's the culture of the organisation? What are your values? And then also, how do you provide me, and we're going to come and talk about technology, but how can I work with you? Do you provide me with the right kit and opportunities and networks with my colleagues? So they are looking at the overall law firm proposition. And if they get any sense that any of that's either missing or is a veneer, then I think that they will walk with their feet. And it's very important, I think, we're finding generationally now that people want to be part of an organisation that they feel aligned with. Helen was talking about sort of individual value sets and how they fit with organisations. I think that's really true, and you can broaden that out because people can work most places now. We're more geography agnostic post-COVID. There's lots of opportunities on the business professional side to work cross-sector. It's not just law firms that provide those opportunities. I think when people have all of that at their disposal, they are going to make a judgment around where do I want to work, where do I feel that I can connect with the values, and where the organisation is authentic. And we hear in the marketplace now from all commentators that purpose-driven business, that values-driven organisation is really paramount. So I think, to your earlier point, that's the starting place for firms to position themselves well to attract talent.
Yeah. I think that one of the other things so that we've certainly found is just opening up. So in the recruitment bit, opening up the opportunity for candidates to go and speak to people who work in the organisation and get the real view. That to me is one way of actually, one, testing whether what you say is actually true for people who are working in the organisation, but giving the candidate a chance to ask all the questions and see if they get the same response from a number of people, because that helps a bit with the litmus test to know what's real and what's actually just espoused but not lived.
I completely agree with that, Tiggy. And what I'd say, not being of legal descent, I've never worked in an industry that is so virally connected. And so I think you absolutely, more than ever, do I feel more accountable? No, because I've always felt accountable. However, as a business, are you more accountable for doing the right thing in a legal firm? I think so. Because actually your brand can both be built and dropped very easily in what is an incredibly small industry.
Yeah, and this say-do gap, do we think it's getting smaller? Are most law firms getting that they need to do that? What's the general sense? Maybe Izabel.
Yes, I think I agree with Tiggy, and if you take that approach, you have to make sure that you are walking the talk and you have embedded it. I think it's very easy to look at your recruitment practices and make sure they're aligned with your values and your diversity strategy, but it's got to run through the whole fabric of the organisation. You really do have to be living and breathing those values. And, one of the things we do at DLA is to make sure that every year there is, in the performance conversations, you're not just talking about, what work gets done, but how it gets done. And everybody has a conversation about the values and whether they're being role modeled, or just being, there's just lip service being paid to them.
Yeah. And similarly, again, if you're looking at the client listening piece, is that where are you looking? I know at Mindful we look at values in client listening as well. Is that something that feeds into your firms? Maybe Emma, if you, sorry.
Sorry, Esther. Yes, absolutely. I think it comes back to that broader point around it's got to be a holistic view around it. So it's got to resonate internally and externally. And I think internally it has to make sense to people as to what is the client listening, what's the market view. So I don't think you can go about developing a values or purpose without that client listening aspects. And I think to a point that Tiggy made earlier, we have a wonderful, highly skilled change manager with our team who then works with all the different teams to say, how do you cascade that down to a team level and then an individual level within those teams so that everyone understands their component part of it and the sense of it and why it's client-led and why it's important to clients. So I think an answer to your question for me, it's that holistic approach.
Yeah, okay. And if we take at DLA, Izabel, if we look at your intern program, which is ranked really highly, I think it's 8th out of the top out of 100. So clearly something's going really well there. What are the key attributes to this success?
I think it's linked to some of the stuff we've already talked about around purpose and making it meaningful. It's got to be authentic. So, we spend quite a lot of time in trying to identify the right candidates, using, our focus on diversity and inclusion and also our social mobility work. But then when you've got the right candidates, giving them a really meaningful experience. And at DLA, because we're an international law firm, and that's one of our kind of differentiators, it has to be international. That's what a lot of people are attracted to us for. But we also want to make it a really real, useful experience. So the people who come into an intern program do real trainee work, have a real supervision experience, so they know what it's like to work in a law firm. And that's true of wherever we hire them. And we hire a lot of interns, about 100 a year in the UK, but also in Germany, Netherlands. It's all about giving people a real taste of what it's like to be a lawyer at DLA Piper.
Yeah. And how are they exposed to the values? So how are your interns exposed to your purpose and values? Do you actually train that out, or is it more of an experience that they get as they go through it?
It's a little bit of both, obviously it's part of the recruitment activity and echoing what people said earlier, you have to express your values and you're looking to attract people who are aligned with your values. And obviously we would in the weeks they spend with us, we do talk about the values and how they're embedded in the firm, but we're also hoping that in everything they do with us that they're actually, getting a kind of experiential, experience of them.
Yeah. Okay, Tiggy, have you got anything to add to that in terms of the kind of the internships and trainee side of things?
I really think the experiential learning is absolutely key, because there's no point coming in and being asked to do photocopying, is there? It's just a waste of everybody's time. So I think actually planning out a program in real detail to make sure that it's giving a really good flavour of what that career would look like it is really important. I think the values, weaving the values bit in is really the challenge is to get it into almost every conversation, isn't it? So when you have completed a piece of work, there's a conversation about it. When someone's running their first meeting, there's a conversation about how that went, what was great about it, what are some of the things that could be improved, which are based around values and behaviours. So I think that's probably our challenge as people who are really passionate about having values that mean something, is then how do you actually physically get it into all those conversations? And that a lot of that is about actually training your mentors and your managers to feel comfortable talking about these values in most of the conversations that they have. So I don't think you can do too much on that. I think it's just a never ending job to just keep them in the forefront, because it's so easy for that to slip back when other pressures come around the corner.
And Izabel, if you look at the pandemic over the last 2 years, where people haven't been in their offices or been part-time, or they've been hybrid working, has that been more difficult to kind of really embed it and cascade it and get hold of people doing it remotely as opposed to face-to-face?
In some ways, yes, because you've lost those kind of moments of connectivity that happen in an office environment. And I think in the legal sector, a lot of the learning was based, in an office, and less experienced lawyers learning by observing, by attending pitches, by working alongside a partner or a more senior colleague. So there are, it took a while, certainly at DLA Piper, to adjust to learning and coaching remotely. We had to spend quite a lot of time, helping our managers make that adjustment, which they have now. So the values, along with everything else, has kind of suffered slightly in that there have been less opportunities and people have had to adjust the way they coach and mentor others. But on the flip side, I think it's, as we said right at the start, the pandemic was such a huge event, and I think Helen used the word, such a leveling event, and seeing everyone's humanity and frailty, and I think that in some ways has reinforced the values and made people focus on the things that really matter.
Yeah, makes people more human, doesn't it? Helen, have you found similarly that I think it's the instant of providing feedback when people are in the office, you go, oh, that wasn't quite right, or that's done better, whereas remotely often a meeting has to be set up with an agenda. How have you overcome that at TLT, or is there any nuggets that you can share that worked well for you?
If only, Esther, because then there could be a whole nother webinar on how we create the non-virtual world in the virtual world. And I echo everything that Izabel said. It's a yes and no in everything. One of the particular things for me, I am a mother of children, I have teenagers, they live their entire life online. What I have to be incredibly careful of is I don't make judgments about whether that's a value or not, because that's how they operate. And I think the online, offline activities, feedback, tasks, it's made it even more acute that we don't make assumptions about what people's preferences are. That makes it even more complicated. And I'm sure every single one of us is going through that moment as we move to whatever hybrid means for each of our firms, those preferences of how others have trodden their career path and whether actually they want to influence others in that way. And that's by no means finished. We're going to still continue to navigate that in a way that will have some great intended outcomes, but also will have some unintended consequences as well.
Yeah, I haven't cracked it fully yet, so we'll be working on that. If we look at the subject of ED&I, I guess that's another key topic on not just law firms, but on the agenda, and really looking at building more inclusive and diverse teams. What have you done at Burges Salmon, Emma, around ED&I to promote that and I guess put it up higher up on the agenda?
Sure, and it's an absolute imperative for us, as I know it is for all firms. And I sit on our gender task force, and I also sit on a number of boards for Thomson Reuters in the UK and the USA looking at this particular issue. And I think actually what I would say is we've revisited our objectives, because I hear differing commentary through the pandemic about the impacts of the pandemic on EDI opportunities, and particularly for female, women, gender issues, sort of leadership in law. And I think the original assumption was, well, this is great because, women have now got the flexibility they've always asked for, they can work from home, etc., etc. And then the reality of trying to wear many different hats, and like Helen, I have young children, so working, homeschooling, negotiating who gets the Wi-Fi at any given moment in time, and all of those things that we had to deal with at the outset, I think actually meant that there are a lot more challenges. And what we're seeing now coming out of recent studies is that, and probably no surprise to people, but on average, women bore the majority of the impact of the homeschooling and the childcare, is what the studies are saying, and that actually those challenges will continue. So I don't think hybrid solves everything. I think there's some particular areas of focus that firms will need to look at now in an ongoing hybrid world. And I think Helen used some really interesting language about, you know, let's see what happens with hybrid, because again, you hear people saying, oh, this is it, it's being like this. And my view is, no, we're still very much in sort of crisis mode, maybe coming out of crisis mode, but we really haven't started the reimagination of what the sort of ongoing future way of working looks like. And I think we'll have to look within that very carefully around topics like work allocation. How do you do that in a fair and consistent way to make sure it's not out of sight, out of mind? Because if we're saying, if on average more women will have the childcare responsibilities than men, and I appreciate there's lots of examples of great male champions in this area, but across the industry I think it's still right that that's where the burden is. How do we make sure that that's fair? How do we make sure that we provide an equal workplace for those working in a hybrid way? And in the same way, we have to rebuild a lot of our culture and policies and organisations to be effective in a hybrid way of working. I think that ED&I aspect will need a very critical eye. I think it's going to be the same with delegation. I think the ongoing challenges around when do you need to travel and who can travel to meet client and business needs, and how do you make sure that people are given the opportunities they need to develop. So if there's an aspect of associates needing to develop their business development to move forward to directorships and partnerships, how do you give them access to those opportunities? What does the sponsorship and leadership and mentoring look like around that? So I think in summary it's going to be a really busy agenda on the ED&I side, and I do think firms will have to look at that from what are the hallmarks and features of a hybrid world, and how do we then respond to that. And I think the final point I would make on it is to broaden out beyond the lawyer. So actually I think what big law firms provide is great opportunities on the business professionals front. We've really seen the industry professionalise over the last 10 to 15 years with services like your firm, Esther, whether it's pricing experts, change managers, all marketeers, all of these skills coming into law firms. And I think they provide great opportunities from an EDI perspective. So how do we formalise those into apprenticeships, into career development schemes to give people really enriched and fulfilled careers in law beyond the sort of narrow role of the lawyer? So that's something else I'm very much an advocate for.
Yeah, okay. It definitely, and I think there's kind of some really key points that you've picked out there. Izabel, which firms do you think have a strong reputation for ED&I? And I guess there's a female side, but it's also the wider kind of minority groups and creating further diverse teams. So any firms that stand out? I'm sure I know which one you're going to pick. So
I wasn't going to say much about law firms because I think law firms are in catch-up mode. I think most firms have moved quite significantly in the last couple of years. You go to any of the websites and you'll see the strategies and goals and targets in whatever form they're expressed. Although I gather CMS are experimenting to go echoes Emma's comment about how work gets allocated, and I heard that they're looking at blind work allocation, which is a really interesting concept. I'm not quite sure how it will work at a law firm, but I think if you're looking outside the legal sector, you'd have to look at the big consulting firms, I think, who have done some really groundbreaking work, especially in terms of employee resource groups, different career paths, ramping up and ramping down your career. I think they work in such a competitive sector that they've had to explore things like hybrid working and different ways of working long before other sectors.
Yeah, I think you're right. I was really interested in the blind allocation. What would be the impact and the benefits of that blind allocation that you talked about in terms of work allocation?
Well, I'm trying to find out myself, but the benefits is obviously that work is allocated fairly across the team, as opposed to what probably happens today, which is people with a strong reputation, with a very good work ethic tend to be kind of the first person that a lot of partners would allocate work to. So actually, making sure that work is kind of fairly distributed across the team. But you have to then ask questions about expertise and familiarity with clients, and there's a lot of other issues that have to be considered to make it work.
Yeah, Okay, interesting. I'm sure we'll find out more as and when that picks up pace. On the ED&I agenda now, Emma, you kind of expanded on the kind of the women, and we've talked about work allocation. I guess there's also kind of the wider minority groups and attracting that. Helen, is there anything that you're doing at TLT in that space?
I think, and you're absolutely right. I mean, all firms start with equality first, which is where we look at protected characteristics. And why do you do that? One, because it's such a vast agenda. It's so systemic. It's so culturally driven. You know, it's the fabric of us as society anyway. That actually to sit in groups first, and that's why gender always becomes the most comfortable to begin with. But actually, you very quickly move on to intersectionality. Of course you do, you know, and social mobility matters to us hugely, you know, commercially, because it's a talent pipeline, and we all know how much we're struggling at the minute. We've given the gift of obviously apprentices in the last couple of years, particularly in the SQE route. All of those things, again, it's a perfect storm moment for opening up great new talent pipelines to us. But similarly, the BAME agenda is incredibly important to us, and I'm sure my fellow panel colleagues will say the same. We operate in multicultural cities. Of course, we should be representing that workforce. And as always, you know, less at the moment for us in the senior roles. We do fairly well in more junior roles, but it's about doing that which we've done in the gender agenda across all diversities and intersectionality.
Yeah, and there's clearly great benefits to having a more diverse and inclusive team as well. Tiggy, maybe moving on to, how do you then, having kind of embarked on this and putting it at the heart of a firm, how do you then actually measure success? So have you got any tips on how in 2 or 3 or 5 years' time you can actually work out whether you're doing the right things and what the next actions are beyond that?
Yeah, well, I think there's a whole raft of consultancies who would probably want to support any firm that wants to actually be able to measure the success of their interventions. So, and actually it is quite a specialised field. So I think often firms have tried to embark doing things by themselves and then have brought other specialist companies in to help them. I think that there's 2 things, aren't there? There's actually statistically, what difference do your practices and policies make? So have you reduced the gender pay gap? Have you taken on more candidates from different socioeconomic backgrounds and not from the traditional Russell Group universities? So those are all really, you can measure all of those and the impact of all of those. But then there's some of the softer questions about within the workforce that you have. Do they actually feel it's an inclusive place to work? And I think that's some of the challenge. Is often you can ask those questions and you might get a real response, or you might get what someone feels like they should say. So I think the conversations, so there's measuring it, but there's also asking the questions and not just doing it once and leaving it there, but to keep those conversations going and to have forums where people can share any concerns that they have or any areas where they actually feel inclusivity and equity and equality isn't happening. And I think being able to, people being free and comfortable to voice those is quite a cultural journey. So I think that's something that isn't going to happen in 6 months. It's going to take a long time, sustained conversations and people feeling they can open up to actually find out whether you are hitting the mark, or whether, there are areas where actually there's a say-do gap again, Emma, which you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and I guess it's that group below partner level. So partners are often heard, aren't they? Is that group below partner level and how their voices are being heard and how that's acted upon. Is there anything, Helen, that you're doing at TLT that might provide some insight for some of the listeners today?
So listening to your people is so important. Of course, I'm going to say that, that's my background, that's where I come from. However, it is absolutely how you make decisions. And I loved Emma mentioning earlier on that, the decision-making framework sits around the values. It's so important, so important. But of course, we've all got quantitative and qualitative surveys. They're really important. We must keep doing them. Their time, do you know what? they're not a thing, they're a continuum, and they're not a destination. It now just needs to be part of the behaviour set that any good business uses, whether that's with clients or with their people. And so you're using, you know, your surveys in the way that you need to, whether it's pulse-based, whether they're extended, whether they're supplemented with qualitative, but you're actually also doing something with them. And that's what really, really matters. Never ignore the external. I've got more than enough that people will say about your business when you're not looking. And we've now got social channels where they will tell us consistently. I've never worked in an industry where everybody tells me about my business so much externally, but actually it's such a good source of intelligence. Make leadership accessible. Do never underestimate, again, and what's the pandemic offered us? It's offered us channels and opportunities for leadership to connect with the rest of the business in ways that haven't happened before. They become open or approachable, arguably, just because they're visually more representative and they're, and you know, just always remember how important that line manager is. And Izabel, you're absolutely right, that conversation that happens, that moment that happens in between the individual and their line manager is incredibly important. And that's where people stay, become engaged, and make sure they're motivated and give their best. But ultimately, you know, it's also, we talked a little bit as well, it's about celebrating those that are doing everything right. It's also about the consequences for those that aren't. That needs to be seen to be done as well. But whatever you hear, whatever you've got, just make sure you've acknowledged and done something with it.
Yeah,
I'd like to kind of follow up on Tiggy's comment about you know, the softer stuff and people answering. Yes, we all do surveys, but are people answering them honestly and enabling people to be able to speak up? I think is really important. So making sure that they feel safe in the workplace to do that, but also making sure people feel it's okay to show your vulnerability. And I think this is another area where actually the pandemic has helped, that people's vulnerabilities have been exposed a little. And we've tried to pick up on that and reinforce that with kind of quite a lot of storytelling in our communication, with people actually sharing stories, some of them internal to DLA, but also using external speakers, with a real focus on vulnerability and authenticity.
Excellent. I think that's a really nice way, that storytelling, and that it is something that does bring it to life, doesn't it? So to make a difference. What about the element of line management? I know, Helen, you picked up on that as well, because the line manager is still really key in all of kind of this retention and the experience of employees and teams. Is there anything that has changed since going more remote in terms of line management, and is there further interventions that you are now doing to help line managers be the best they can be?
So I think the job has become trickier. You know, I'm a line manager too. We all wear about 20 different hats, don't we? And actually, you just have to be so much more intentional around the activities, the tasks, and the connections that you make with your team. We're all finding our post-pandemic moment, as is your team, but of course, as the line manager, everyone's looking to do and to see what you're doing, the say-do gap, obviously. And of course, yes, what happens with line managers about giving them the time? That's tricky in the legal industry, because again, often every single line manager is carrying several different roles. It's interesting, Izabel, that you mentioned, obviously, the accountancy firms, the other professional services firms. And one of the really hard decisions they had to make, and it was about a decade ago, was about how many roles a line manager could actually carry, and therefore freeing up that time. And I think that's coming for the legal industry as well at some point. Yeah, and it's absolutely about giving them time, reassuring them, giving them development, but also recognising it's a super big job. It's a super big job to do.
Yeah. How does that, Tiggy, compare to other industries in terms of the kind of that line management? Do you see that's any different in other industries to the legal sector?
My observation over sort of 10 plus years is just the amount of development and training given to people managers in legal is low. Historically is low, and I think there's recognition that causes issues. So I've seen a lot of firms in the last couple of years starting to invest much more in training in people management. You know, how do you have good conversations? What sort of things should you be talking about in performance reviews? Just what I think, if you've come from outside of law, you would recognise as something that you would probably get trained in, maybe not brilliantly, but have some training in, which has not been absent, but I think it's been at quite a low level, and due to time pressures, often there hasn't been enough time given to that. So I think that is on the rise, which is really brilliant. I think there's real challenges just giving line managers in law firms enough information about some of the the agenda items that have been raised here. So ED&I and sustainability and other big ticket agenda items that teams are going to be interested in and want to talk about, and often line managers feel really worried that they're going to do or say the wrong thing. So I think that sort of being able to communicate well with that that group of people who've got a lot of responsibility on their shoulders is really key, and firms that do that well and make a bit of extra time for that are probably going to reap the benefits.
Yeah. We've just got a question pop in on the channel. Do you think expectations people have of their employer is changing as well? So maybe Emma, if we pass that one on to you.
Sure, I think they are, and I've touched earlier on the text. I think people are looking at, can an organisation provide me with the right framework to flourish? And that comes from everything from the line management and leadership and the strategic view that we've been talking about, through to the tools to do the trade. And I think in this hybrid world, that's ever more important. I think the office now is not as it used to be. It's about what tasks do I need to do where. So people are thinking a lot harder and smarter about where do I need to be for clients, for the organisation, for my team, and then finally for yourself. And I think that cascade is actually really important, but we can come back to that. So I think they're looking at the value alignment piece we talked about. They're looking at the overall ambition and goals of the organisation, the work opportunity and the career development opportunities that organisation can bring along with their own personal career aspirations, and then is it an environment in which I can thrive in? And I think if they see a gap there, then they're going to look elsewhere. And as I say, for our business professionals, which in a number of firms are a third to half of the workforce, and I think sometimes get overlooked actually, they're sector agnostic, so we shouldn't be complacent about that. So I agree with the question posed from the audience.
Yeah,
okay. I think I was just going to add that I think one of the one of the components which is really important is around personal development and training. So in law, there's often been a massive focus on technical training, but actually all the sort of commercial, business acumen, people management, the other skill sets that sit around being able to do your role properly, probably I think that's where people are pushing for more. So both people who work for organisations and those who are looking at moving, it's just how do I become a really rounded individual, and how do I get the sort of personal development that I want for my career. So if you're not offering that, I think it will be a challenge for firms to keep and also attract talent, because firms are lots of firms are looking at this really seriously and investing a lot of money in it.
Yeah, which segues neatly to my next question, which has come in. It's around budgets. So do we feel, maybe Izabel, are you investing more in training and development, and also the bringing teams back together, so for face-to-face? So have you seen an increase in kind of budgets across the firm for that?
We certainly are, as I mentioned earlier, we've had to invest quite a lot in different kinds of training to prepare managers in particular, to give them the tools they need to manage in this kind of hybrid world. We've obviously also had to kind of reformat a lot of our training. I suspect we weren't alone in the law sector in having been quite traditional in our training approach. So a lot of the training was done in person and face to face. And now obviously we've reverted to a more blended model. We still get a lot of feedback from people who attend courses that they want the networking opportunity, they want to get together with colleagues, but certainly not for 4 days at a time. So moving to kind of 2 days online and 2 days in person. In terms of encouraging people, yes, back to office is to reconnect. yes, we've invested money in that as well, in different activities, in reminding people of the benefits of being in the office. For some reason, free food seems to work for us a lot, and whenever free food is offered, this seems to draw people into the office. I'm not quite sure what that is, and it's not just in the UK, it's across a number of countries. And money we would have spent, it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be more money, but repurposing money we previously would have spent on kind of like Christmas parties and client events that just don't happen in the current environment.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. And if we look at it, if we put the lens of leadership over the top of this, so if we look at, I guess, the roles of leaders in empowering teams and really building high-performing teams, Helen, what's your thoughts on that?
It's intrinsic, of course it is. I think let's remember leaders are human beings as well. I'm sure many of us on the call now are leaders and also want to be seen as being human. And I think all the challenges that we're all experiencing as part of the future of work, whatever we want to call it, our leadership teams are as well. But it is incredibly important, we go back to that say-do gap, that they are seen to be doing the right thing at the right moments and encouraging everybody's voice to be heard and everybody to succeed. And again, I just go back to that is quite a challenge, it is. And our job is obviously to support, engage and motivate leadership teams as much as we do the rest of the firm and the business.
Yeah. And Emma, do you think that with remote working, has that kind of increased the autonomy and accountability, or is it quite the opposite?
Oh no, certainly in terms of autonomy, absolutely. I mean, I think there's been, as we'd probably all agree, a transformational sea change brought about by COVID. Law firms are traditionally slow to change, as we know, and I think that was a much needed transformational shift, so that we've moved away from presenteeism. I mean, pre-COVID, it wasn't conceivable that people would dial into a call or meeting. I think like others, rolling out Microsoft Teams was on our agenda, but it was going to be a sort of 4-month rollout, and there was some reticence about video calls and lawyers saying, well, what's wrong with the speakerphone? I don't want to see myself on video, thanks, I'm sort of inherently nervous. And within 48 hours, all firms had to roll out Teams. It was the smoothest, quickest project deployment ever, and people just had to get on with it. So I think that provided us with the framework. I think the plea and the need for all of us is that we do take the good from the crisis into the new way of working, and that we don't slip back to old habits. I know of a number of colleagues who are saying, well, look, I buy into the new hybrid way of working, want to be present in the office for all the right reasons around human connection and engaging with colleagues and so on. But actually I'm commuting in, there's an hour that I'm now losing, and I'm back-to-back team calls when I get there, and then I'm commuting home. So that isn't efficient use of time. So I do think we all need to look at how we work, the way we work, how we manage diaries, how we work effectively. And I think there was something in Harvard Business Review last year that really resonated with me, and they were saying it's not everyone was playing the flexibility card, and they're saying that's not what it is. It's actually your words, or autonomy and effectiveness, and that we really need to enable all of our people with the right tools, and really importantly the technologies, to be sort of 1, effective, 2, autonomous, and 3, connected. And I think that's hard. To Helen's earlier point, I'm not saying that's easy, but I think if that's the overall aim, if we can create a framework that provides for that, then we've got the best chance of success. So people have to be enabled with the tools to do the job. They have to feel empowered. So for us, we had hybrid guidelines, not a policy, so that people have flexibility within that. But it was anchored very much around client need first, a sort of pyramid cascade, then business needs, then team need, then yourself. And I think that we're all having to pivot. So we've had 2 years of being told, put yourself first, stay at home, hunker down, protect your family and those closest to you. And actually, I know that people are finding they then have to adjust to a return to whatever the new normal is, where actually there's a different requirement now. And it's not about what suits me and the routine I've got into a childcare or a gym class or whatever, how their life is structured. And we're having to roll out a sort of cascade that says, the nirvana is getting all of that to work for everybody, but it now has to start with business need first. And my sense is that's sort of the place where a lot of firms are, this sort of transitioning and adjusting to what the new normal is. But I think, as I say, it's important that we don't lose sight of those benefits and just get tempted to slip into old habits. Otherwise we won't have benefited from the crisis in the way that we might.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly right, isn't it? It's easy to slip back into old ways of working, and things are still changing. How are you finding, Helen, that? And I think you're saying, Emma, that it was me first, and now actually firm is in clients are really important as well. Have you got any guidelines, or how are you managing that within your teams, Helen?
So I think we're absolutely experiencing everything that Emma's described. Of course we are. I think our slightly different approach is we've gone for people first, but that has meant obviously equipping our team leaders, our line managers with some real EQ and absolutely understanding how, and it is all the three bits. How do you put yourself, the business and the client together, whilst knowing what we're all trying to do is to maintain that phenomenal trust and engagement that we've gained from our people as part of the pandemic period, because we have. And it's about nurturing that and holding on to it whilst using all the other levers that we've got to make sure the businesses still remain successful. In the middle of this, and every single one of us in a law firm are experiencing this, we don't actually have enough people to do all the work that we've got currently. So again, we talked about the Great Resignation, we've talked about the retention challenges. What we're trying to do is to use everybody's time so effectively, but not to the point that actually they're exhausted. And part of that is also, again, a society, all the stuff we're experiencing is coming out to whatever this future of work looks like, allowing people to do the repairing that they need to do, continuing to look after their well-being and being productive on behalf of the firm. It is a challenge. And I think Emma described it really well when she talked about pivoting, because whatever is one day might not be the next. And and again, that can be a little overwhelming for some as well. So it is very, very new for us to be absolutely connecting and engaging with our people totally on emotion, production, contribution, values, but we're in the right place and having the right conversation.
Yeah, and it's that feeling of empowerment, and I guess some of it is around evolving decisions. And Izabel, have you seen a shift to perhaps decisions that were made kind of by the partners or centrally that has further developed out? Has that accelerated at all?
Not really. I think I agree with Emma that there's been a sea change in terms of autonomy for individuals. But I think the nature of law firms and the partnership, means that there's still that desire to take everything to the partners, which creates this culture of everyone needs to be consulted. And quite often the only way of resolving something is to take the decision to the highest level. So, that seems to be very slow to change. I think, in spaces where you're doing a little bit more innovation, that there seems to be a bit more willingness to kind of experiment, to devolve a little, to allow different people to get involved. But it's very slow.
Yeah. And Tiggy, have you seen anywhere, I guess it's that decision making by committee, isn't it? And in particular, the partner model does lend itself well to the decision making by committee. Have you seen anywhere where that has been broken, or where some of that decision making has been successfully devolved?
Yes, I have, but it's few and far between, I would say. So yeah, but I agree with Izabel. Where I've seen it working the best is in innovation programs, because I think naturally you go and speak to the board or the partnership group and say, we want to do something a bit exciting. Can we have permission to go and try some stuff out with a budget, please? And in some instances there's been a yes, and then there is delegated authority it's been given, so you can do what you want within X parameters. And I think that as a model for future decision making is great, but it's just agreeing which are the decisions that can be made at which level, because as you say, the normal experience is to just push it up as far as you can until you get a decision. And actually doing some, so I've seen a couple of organisations doing some real thinking and some work specifically about decision making, authority levels, and where decisions can be made. But I think it goes against the grain of most firms, because it's a difficult, thorny issue to resolve. But I don't think that means that it shouldn't be something that's discussed with the partnership group, because actually, if you're going to empower people to make decisions, then normally, you know, theory shows that the decisions that made closest to the client are probably the better ones. So it's something that I think firms have got to be brave and start to talk about at that level, is how do we enable people to do their jobs as efficiently as they possibly can, because all that decision making flow up to the top does is cause delay. And what is, you know, what things really do have to be decided at partnership level, hopefully a lot less than has been historically made.
Yes, I can see Emma nodding there. I'm sure you'd like to add to that. I think there is something around that decision making and empowering teams, and, you know, the key challenges and how to overcome that.
It all absolutely resonates what Tiggy and Izabel have been saying, and I always find it a peculiarity, but I guess it comes from the model of sort of owner, manager, producer on site, and being so close to the working environment where I've worked in other corporates, and you've got remote shareholders. You're still delivering value for those shareholders, but you're sort of reporting annually to an AGM or quarterly board reports, where actually I find in a law firm, as Izabel articulated, it's day-to-day partners wanting to be involved in decisions around open plan desking or some other topic that in a corporate would be devolved to the business professionals teams. I think to Tiggy's point, it's incumbent on all of those in law firm leadership to not indulge the partners in that way, and to help shift the model actually, and to agree with the partnership. What are those decisions that really need to be made either by the board or full partners, and what others can we empower people to deliver against the firm's strategy? And then look on that and hold those teams accountable to that delivery, but give them, as you say, the space and the opportunity to thrive and deliver for the firm. That feels like an ongoing journey, and I'm not sure we'll solve that one overnight. And some of that is to the benefit of the wonderful cultures that we see within law firms, that you've got that partner engagement. But I do think my view is that law firms are professionalising. They're at different stages of that organisational maturity development, and they're on that journey. And as firms get bigger, you get to a size, I'm sure Izabel will say it's impossible for all their partners to be involved in every decision. We're still of a size with 100 partners where they feel that they probably can be, but we'll shift through that growth where actually you find that you're empowering your board and your teams to do that delivery. So it certainly resonates.
Yeah. And Helen, how are you addressing those kind of, I guess, there are cultural barriers to decision making and moving kind of where it doesn't sit with the partner, does it sit lower down? What are you doing to address that?
I mean, just acknowledging everything that Emma said about having previously worked in corporates. It is a peculiar state of affairs at times. At the same time, it can also be used to your advantage, you know, because, you know, the reality of engagement and having the absolute wealth of the commitment and the partnership is a great place to be. What I have observed, and particularly in TLT, is our use of data in the last 2 or 3 years has become way more acute. And you know, it was again, just slightly unusual for me when I first came into the business. We're sat on a data lake. Every business is sat on a data lake. We weren't necessarily using it to help those decisions. And that has definitely become much more of an art form for us. And going back to those reference points and baking our decision making in 2 spots is, you know, what is quantitative and qualitative data saying to us alongside those values? And I think those 3 things together do engage that accountability and that empowerment more. It's still a journey for us, you know. Let's not say that we've got it completely cracked, because some of our leaders are incredibly comfortable in that space, some aren't, you know. Some are very comfortable in still making very intuitive decisions, often right ones as well. But certainly, you know, that use of data has been a really helpful move for us.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you've seen in your travels? So there's clearly the use of data. Is there any other things that, in terms of addressing those cultural barriers, that have been successful?
I think the most successful framework that I've seen was it was actually in a council where they created something called Freedom Within a Framework, which really clearly articulated what decisions could be made at which level, and it took about a year for them to actually go through this process. So they consulted on which sort of decision, and as a council, they had certain decisions that had to be made by certain levels of people who worked within the organisation, but then there were others that were free for, you know, discussion, and they set that out very, very clearly, and then rolled out this framework with examples of, you know, what was and wasn't good practice and behaviour, and that was linked with more of a drive to become outcomes based, and that was really successful. But it took quite a lot of effort and quite a lot of consultation to get it right, and they revisited it a couple of times. But that worked really, really well. But that was specifically going after that point about decision making, really clearly trying to tackle some big inefficiencies that they had in decision making.
Yeah. And I think the interesting thing with that as well is devolving that decision making within a framework. You do give people permission to succeed, but also permission to fail. Izabel, I'm really interested to hear from you. You talked about vulnerability earlier and how you do that through storytelling. In this kind of empowerment, how do you allow people to fail or perhaps not get it right first time?
Again, it's I suppose the points that Helen was making about managers. It very much sits with the manager, doesn't it? It is the person who not only kind of supervises the work, but you know, coaches and mentors the people doing it, and making sure that there is that freedom to fail and that freedom to experiment and learn on the job. I think it's all about your management capability.
Yeah.
It's also a cultural thing, though, because even the word failure is, you know, it's just, that's not what people are trained to do. They're trained to be very technically correct and to offer the right answer. So to actually be able to make mistakes or for things not to go well is just allowing the conversation about that, and for that to be something that's talked about regularly, and for feedback to be provided that's really open and honest. Just that needs to be encouraged and encouraged and encouraged in law firms, because it's not how people are trained to do their work. They're trained to not make mistakes. So just to be able to have that conversation, say it's okay and it's good, you know, it's good to learn and this is part of your development. I think that just needs to be reinforced. Yeah. Not just through, like, you know, it's got to work all the way up, hasn't it, and all the way back down again.
Tiggy, you're so spot on, and you know the whole theory around psychological safety is incredibly important for law firms, and in particular, it has such an impact on actually to err is human. Everyone's going to make a mistake. Let's start with that principle before we go anywhere, but allow that to happen. But also psychological safety is so important for the wellbeing agenda. It's also incredibly important from ED&I as well, because we will absolutely get stuff wrong in that space. And from a wellbeing perspective, not solely, but how many issues come from people believing that they're doing the wrong thing, that they're not quite where they need to be and not getting that reassurance. You know, so you're absolutely spot on with the cultural aspects of it.
And we see it in innovation. So that's some of the struggle. We're trying to think about the way that products and services are delivered and business models, is that there's appetite to do things differently. But when you come to the practicality of trying to create something that can be tested and shown to a client, people don't want to do it because it has to be perfect before you can talk to a client or show a client. So I just think that the whole conversation about, you know, what risk are we willing to take on as a firm, and, you know, how many mistakes can we allow and of what type. I think that conversation needs to be explored a lot more than it currently is.
I completely agree, Tiggy. Everything the panel said absolutely resonates, and we spent some time saying to all of our boards, it's okay if a project's behind it. Perfectionism isn't going to happen. Just talk about it and we'll come up with the solutions. But one of the ways we've tried to practically address it is for our innovation team, we've ring-fenced an investment amount of money for R&D that we've said, just go and find some new toys and experiment with that. And you don't have to put a big business case forward and talk about the return on investments. And to your point, Tiggy, getting it perfect before it goes to a client, actually that's kind of free for you to go and do what you need to. And if it delivers nothing, we're okay with that. Of course, it'd be great if it delivers something, but we're genuinely okay with that. And we've done that in a sort of small way. And that's something we're hoping to sort of amplify and broaden out, because I think it is really important, because we'll get the best out of our people then if they're not feeling constrained by, I can't fail in a law firm, you know, any failure, even a missing full stop in an email, is a catastrophe. And I elaborate on that, but 15 years ago, I think that was in part some of the environment we were in for some of our business professionals that were joining the legal sector.
Yeah. I think talking about when it hasn't gone well and what's been learned is the next bit, isn't it? It's to say, okay, if it didn't work, why not? And how are we finding that an actual useful thing to have done?
Yeah. That learning point is so important. You know, we learn from our greatest mistakes, don't we? Wherever.
It always is. It always is. And I think this topic in particular rings true. So I'm getting lots of messages through this channel around this perfectionism, and in particular in legal, more than any other industry, where there is, you know, it's that psychological safety, as you were talking about, Helen, is you know, how can you allow people to experiment but within their boundaries, and then learn from it if it hasn't quite gone right, and what's your appetite for risk taking on that. Izabel, is there anything from a DLA perspective around that risk taking and I guess that's continual feedback then to learn lessons and to adopt any, you know, any lessons learned thereafter?
I think the appetite for risk taking is quite low, so we're starting from a low place. But I think you know, it is about having the conversation and encouraging people to talk about how they're feeling. You know, Helen talked about psychological safety, and the well-being agenda has become so important, just so that people feel that they can express these things, and letting people know it's okay to talk about things that you know, a decade ago everyone would shy away from because they found it awkward and embarrassing.
Yeah, it's definitely moved on. As we kind of just looking at the time as well, as we're wrapping up, what would be really useful, because I guess ultimately all the elements that we've talked about all come back to that point of communication and regular communication. That's right from, we started talking about kind of the purpose and values, but then we talked about kind of feedback and I guess our later subject around perfectionism. It'd be good to go around the table and just see what your best practice examples are of good communication. So Helen's smiling, so I'm going to start with her. So I'm sure she's got something great up her sleeve there. So
thanks for that, Esther. You know, and it's a classic line. You have to be the change that you want to see. Don't ask anybody around you to be a great communicator if you're not doing it yourself. And for me, I mean, authenticity matters, partly because I'm lazy, I'm not going to lie, because I can't be two people, I can only be one. So, you know, but I hope what that does, and I did say that slightly tongue-in-cheek, obviously, but I hope what it does, it invites others to be themselves as well. And that means that wherever they are at that current part in their day, in their moment, wherever they sit in the business, they feel that they can connect and communicate, and that really matters for me.
Isabel, what's your take?
I think it's, you know, there is still an element of the tone from the top. So I agree with everything Helen said. I think you have to get your communication from your senior leaders right. And that's where kind of storytelling has certainly helped us, getting people talking about their personal experiences, not about their CVs and not about their clients, but about themselves as people, and having a much more informal style of communication. You know, vlogs from senior leaders filmed at home, talking about home life and being very informal with it, so people feel they can share these stories and can be, you know, be more honest and more personal.
Yeah, is that kind of, I guess, having a real person and not say do again, it's okay to show vulnerability as well. Emma, is there any particular examples of great communication that you've seen or you advocate?
Absolutely, certainly what Izabel said resonates, and we've been doing the same in our managing and senior partners, doing leadership videos from home. Everyone's had to navigate a different journey through COVID, and I think it is those human stories and bringing it to life. one of the things we tried to do within our team is to making sure we engineer catch-ups in a way that you didn't have to in the office. Very much back to Izabel's point on the sort of human factor and the storytelling. I was talking to a neuroscientist very early on in the pandemic that we're working with on a project, and she said to me, in your team meetings, it needs to not just be business and that, it needs to be about people, encourage people to tell stories about their lives that they're going through each week. A lot of them will resonate with others, and actually then you can start building some rapport and human connection around that. So, and also to make those meetings walking meetings, because we're all have been chained to sitting down, not getting our minimum 10,000 steps in per day in this environment where we just sort of stared at a screen for however many hours. So we do those as walking meetings where we'll be out and about talking to each other and asking people to share a sort of work score out of 10 and a life score out of 10, and then from the life scores we could draw on, well, tell us why yours is really low today, or what's gone really well in life. And that's something we didn't do pre-pandemic, but we're going to continue doing, because it very much, I think in the past, has been a feeling of every second counts. It's work in a law firm environment, but actually that storytelling and human connection and rapport is fundamental. So I think we've learned through the pandemic the importance of that, and we're looking at ways to keep that alive as we move into the reimagination of the future way of working.
Yeah, and it's great to see that some of those changes as a result, direct result of the pandemic, are really good and are something that we should continue with. And it's, as you're saying, it's looking at employer life, but looking at people's lives as well, because they are interconnected whether we like it or not. Tiggy, let's finish on you for the final bang, for the final top tips on effective communications.
Well, I'm feeling the pressure now. I think there's two. So for me, it's listen first and then encourage feedback. So both ways, up and down, left, right, however. And also just getting time in the day. So Emma's point about making sure that there are informal, there's time for it. So what we do at 9 Feet Tall is we start our meetings 5 minutes after the hour and we finish 10 minutes before the hour. So you just have time for either a chat with someone or just to be able to go to the loo or whatever, so that your day is not just meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, because we've lost the water cooler and the chat moment, and you have to kind of manually put it back in. And I think that's really important. So making sure there is still connection and time to just be a human being and have a chat.
Perfect. Well, now I've been told we have to finish 10 minutes early. We better wrap up, haven't we, Tiggy? So it has been an absolute pleasure. So I just want a big thank you, Emma, Izabel, Helen, and Tiggy. We've covered some really interesting and pressing topics. Importance of purpose and values. We talked about the say-do, the continuous communication, and that real importance of feedback and connection. I really like the storytelling examples and showing vulnerability and making sure it's relevant as well to people. And I think one of the things, I think, Tiggy, you picked up on this freedom within a framework. So if we really truly want to empower our teams, is giving them freedom, but giving them some boundaries to work within as well. And I know it's tricky to get that right, but there's definitely a kind of a good thought around how to empower teams and how to really make that happen, how to really make it stick. And I think there's some real positives that have come out of pandemic and ways of working and hybrid working and the way we talk to our people, and some of the, I guess, importance around not just work life, but also life, so people's lives. So we've got some really great topics. So thank you very much for that. And we are offering, off the back of this, for all people that have attended, we are offering an employee value proposition assessment. So the lovely Tiggy has been put forward for this, to run a session with your teams to look at your value proposition to your employees and potential employees, and create a heat map to look at what are the areas that's working and where are areas that you could improve as well. So if you are interested in that, then let us know. There'll be some information that will go out of the back of that. So thank you again, and I hope you all, we've got 5 minutes left, so we'll give you 5 minutes back for a comfort break and a cup of coffee, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.